Hello everyone. Tonight we are going to dive into something a little less comfortable, a lot grimmier, and surprisingly, something that shaped the very notion of rest and recovery as we know it today. Imagine this. You've just spent a long day, perhaps battling traffic, deciphering complex spreadsheets, or wrangling tiny humans with boundless energy. Now, you're finally home. You kick off your shoes, maybe put on some ridiculously soft pajamas, and sink into a bed that's probably more comfortable than a cloud. You dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that perfect background hum, and drift off into a blissful, undisturbed sleep. Sounds good, right? Almost too good. Because what if I told you that the very concept of bedtime, as you understand it, this sacred, private, comfortable ritual, is a surprisingly recent invention. You might think you can't survive without your memory foam mattress and blackout curtains, but trust me, you probably wouldn't survive a single night in the world we're about to explore. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan, and play some soft background music, and let's get started tonight. You open your eyes, and the first thing you see is your brother's foot, inches from your face, grimy and twitching slightly from some horrifying dream. Welcome to your one and only room. It's not a bedroom, it's not a living room, it's the room. And it's everything. You share it with 6 other souls, 1 bed, 2 chairs, with questionable structural integrity, and a rat who's been around so long you're considering charging him rent. There's no wallpaper, just patches of wall where something used to be. The ceiling leaks when it rains, and even when it doesn't, it drips something that you've decided not to investigate. The fireplace is fake. The air is damp. The floor creaks, like it's trying to warn you of your own mortality. You're wrapped in a thin wool blanket that hasn't been washed since the Crimean War, and the pillow under your head is made of straw, possibly mixed with someone's long-forgotten sock. There's no plumbing. That bucket in the corner, that's the toilet, bath, and emergency water source, depending on the time of day and level of desperation. You've learned to breathe through your mouth in the mornings. It helps a bit. There's one window, if you can call it that, so covered in soot and fog it mostly just lets in the sound of cartwheels, shouting vendors, and someone aggressively coughing 3 doors down. You try not to think about the fact that the window opens onto an alley where the butcher dumps his offcuts and your neighbor keeps his goat. Every morning begins with a family-wide shuffle. You dress under blankets to avoid the cold. You swap spots around the wash basin like it's a game of musical chairs with fewer prizes, and someone always knocks over the chamber pot. And yet, somehow, this room is still home. You know which floorboard creaks, which corner drips, and which window pane rattles just before your neighbor yells about his stolen boots. You know the smell, the dust, the strange sense of belonging. But make no mistake, this room isn't comfortable. It isn't cute. It's a place that prepares you for the day outside by making you suffer a little before you even leave. And trust me, the streets won't be kinder. Historians still debate whether the close quarters fostered stronger family bonds or simply more frequent arguments. But one thing is certain. Privacy was a luxury only the wealthy could afford. This intimate, inescapable proximity meant that personal habits, hygiene, or lack thereof, and even the most private moments were shared experiences. Imagine trying to have a romantic moment with your spouse while your entire family sleeps inches away. Or perhaps it's less romantic and more strategic. My point exactly. The sheer lack of space meant that the concept of a separate bedroom for sleep was a foreign one for the vast majority of Londoners. Sleep was simply a cessation of activity wherever you could collapse. This forced communal living, while seemingly unbearable by modern standards, did create a peculiar kind of resilience and an unspoken understanding among its inhabitants. You learn to ignore, to adapt, and to find tiny pockets of peace in a constantly shared existence. It was a life of involuntary intimacy, where every creak of the floorboards or rustle in the straw was a reminder that you were never truly alone. You stumble out the front door, still blinking sleep from your eyes and clutching half a crust of bread, and immediately walk face first into a wall of choking fog. But this isn't the romantic, candle-lit haze they write about in novels. No, this is London's infamous pea souper, and it's like trying to breathe through a cold, stuffed sock. The sky is gray, the street is gray, the air is gray. You can't see the end of your own arm, and you're pretty sure that's a lamppost ahead or possibly a horse. Could go either way. This fog isn't just weather, it's murderous. Formed by the happy marriage of industrial coal smoke and natural mist, it clings to everything. It seeps into your lungs, coats your throat, and gives your clothes that signature London look, soot, streaked, and mildly flammable. You cough. Everyone coughs. It's part of the local soundtrack, like church bells and clattering hooves. Children hack like lifelong smokers. Old men cough so hard they rattle windows. And doctors, well, they recommend moving to the countryside, which is great advice if you own land and your own lungs. The smell is a complex bouquet. Chimney soot, sewage vapor, horse manure, and last night's overcooked cabbage. If perfume makers bottled this, it would be called Ode to Urban Misery, and it gets into everything. Your hair, your bread, your one nice shirt you wear to funerals and job interviews. It's all stained with the scent of progress. The worst part? No one's surprised. People go about their day blindly, literally. Street lamps burn all day long and still don't help. You hear someone trip in the alley next to you, and someone else swear as their umbrella disappears into the mist like a ghost ship. At night, it gets even thicker. The fog curls through door cracks. It blankets the tenements, and if you don't keep a candle lit, you might walk straight into the fireplace, or, worse, your neighbor's lap. So yes, the air in Victorian London doesn't just choke you, it brands you, smokes you, and dares you to keep breathing. And you haven't even reached the street market yet. One canonical historical event tied to this pervasive atmospheric menace was the Great Smog of 1952. Though our focus is Victorian London, the roots of that event were firmly planted in the 19th century's industrial practices, while the 1952 event was catastrophic. It was merely an extreme manifestation of a century of chronic air pollution, illustrating just how deadly the ordinary Victorian pea souper could be. Historians still debate whether the primary cause of the fog's density was domestic coal fires or industrial emissions, but the consensus is that both contributed to a toxic atmospheric cocktail. It's truly a strange and unusual detail that street lamps had to burn all day long during the worst fogs, rendering them almost useless, and yet life, somehow, continued. People went to work, children played, work coughed, and commerce stumbled on. It's a testament to human adaptability, or perhaps sheer stubbornness. You could say Londoners were the original fog eaters. They literally breathed their city, and the city, in turn, became part of them, often in the form of chronic respiratory illnesses. It was a landscape where the very air was a character, an antagonist, constantly reminding you of your precarious existence. Remember crocodile poop sunscreen? This is like that, but you're breathing it in. You've made it out of bed, out of your smoke-soaked hovel, and down into the day's gray beginnings. Now, your stomach groans. Time for breakfast. Except, breakfast in Victorian London is less of a meal and more of a ritual in lowered expectations. If you're part of the working class, and you almost certainly are, breakfast isn't eggs or toast or a hearty pile of bacon. It's a crust of bread that could double as a roof tile, maybe some porridge if the oats weren't eaten by the rats in the cupboard, and tea, always tea, not because it's comforting, but because it's boiled, and anything that's been boiled probably won't kill you. Milk? Only if you can afford it, and even then, it's a gamble. It might be watered down, or, worse, preserved with formaldehyde by enterprising vendors who think child safe is a loose guideline. Sugar is expensive, butter a legend, jam only if your aunt died and left you some in her will. If you're lucky enough to work in a factory or live near a bakery, you might sniff warm bread on the air. Don't get excited. That's not your bread. That's someone else's breakfast, likely belonging to a man with a hat and a last name on his door. And if you're really down on your luck, an orphan, an out-of-work widow, or just someone who lost their job to a machine, you might find yourself queuing at a workhouse for a ladle of grayish gruel. It's warm, it's edible. That's about the kindest thing one can say. Street vendors might offer fried potatoes or old meat pies, but beware. The meat is unidentifiable, the oil ancient, and the odds of intestinal regret high. Still, the smell is oddly inviting when you're starving. Everything smells like hope. You eat quickly, standing, wrapped in your coat, like a cloak of denial. There's no dining room, no soft morning music, just cold fog, clanging wheels, and the distant sound of someone already yelling about stolen coal. And now, belly's only half full, and spirits not at all. It's time to step into the real monster, the streets of London. One canonical historical event highlighting the dire food situation was the Irish potato famine, 1845 to 1849. While not directly in London, its devastating impact flooded cities like London with desperate, starving migrants, further straining already meager food supplies and exacerbating the competition for scraps among the working poor. This influx meant even more mouths to feed, with even less to go around, painting an even grimmer picture of the breakfast struggle. A strange and unusual detail about Victorian food was the common practice of adulteration. Milk cut with chalk or formaldehyde, bread mixed with plaster of Paris, and beer doctored with toxic ingredients were not uncommon. This wasn't just about cheating customers. It meant that even when you could afford something, you might be poisoning yourself without knowing it. Talk about a culinary adventure. Historians still debate whether the widespread consumption of weak tea, often brewed multiple times from the same leaves, provided any real nutritional benefit or merely a psychological comfort, a warm liquid to fill an empty stomach. Was it a necessity or a delusion? Perhaps a bit of both. You know, like that coffee you make at home when you're out of beans and just brew some old grounds for the 10th time. It's the thought that counts, right? And the warm feeling in your belly. Welcome to the streets of Victorian London, a sprawling, chaotic organism pulsing with smoke, mud, and misery. Every step you take is a calculated risk, and the street doesn't care if you're late for work or just trying to cross the road without being trampled to death. First things first, there are no sidewalks, or if there are, they're so narrow, cracked, and crowded that using them is a polite suggestion, not a safety guarantee. The main road is a mucky battlefield of hoofbeats, wagon wheels, and ankle-deep sludge. Horse-drawn carts barrel past at terrifying speeds. Carriages clip corners. One false move, and you're face down in a puddle that smells like something died in it, because something probably did. Now, mind the gutters. They run down the middle of the street, carrying all the city's discarded glory. Rotting vegetables, dead rats, coal ash, the contents of chamber pots dumped from upstairs windows, and the occasional shoe, foot optional. Crossing them without slipping requires Olympic-level balance, or a very long stick, and no dignity. But it's not just the terrain that's out to get you. It's the people, too. You've got street urchins darting around like caffeinated squirrels, pickpockets brushing against your coat accidentally, and vendors yelling about eels, kippers, or something vaguely called meat. Everyone's yelling all the time about everything. There are also the coppers, trying to look important while ignoring most of what's happening around them. If someone gets stabbed, they'll eventually wander over, assuming the shift hasn't ended or they haven't been bribed to look the other way. The air, still thick with smog, is now flavored with horse manure and pipe smoke. And in the distance, you hear the bells of St. Paul's, or maybe that's just your ears ringing after someone shouted in your face about chimney soot. Oh, and if it rains, which it does often, the streets turn into rivers of filth. No one offers an umbrella. No one even looks surprised. You just pull your coat tighter and trudge through it, hoping your boots don't dissolve. And this is just your commute. Survive the streets, and you might live to find a job, or at least something that pays enough to keep bread on the table and rats off your toes. The real great stink of 1858 is a canonical historical event that perfectly encapsulates the horror of London's streets and water. The River Thames, serving as the city's main sewer, became so overwhelmingly noxious that Parliament, situated beside it, was forced to adjourn, hanging curtains soaked in disinfectant in an attempt to combat the stench. This utterly revolting incident finally forced the government to act, leading to the construction of a comprehensive sewer system. It took the smell to be literally unbearable for the politicians to do something about the problem. It's a strange and unusual detail that mudlarks, often children, would spend their days scavenging along the exposed banks of the Thames at low tide, digging through the foul sludge for anything salvageable. Old coins, bits of metal, bones, even scraps of rope. This was a common, albeit disgusting way to earn a few pennies, highlighting the extreme desperation that drove people to literally sift through the city's refuse. Historians still debate whether the constant exposure to street-level filth, combined with the lack of basic hygiene, contributed to a certain immunity among survivors, or simply ensured that everyone lived in a perpetual state of low-grade illness. Was it adaptation, or just prolonged suffering? You could say the streets of London were the original survival of the grimmiest. Don't forget, if you slipped, you weren't just falling, you were becoming part of the street. Good luck trying to get that smell out of your clothes. You've navigated the sewers, masquerading as streets, dodged horses and hooligans, and now it's time to make your living, if the city allows it. In Victorian London, A job isn't a title, it's a test of endurance, a way to slowly fall apart while clinging to the illusion of stability. If you're a man, you might be lucky enough to land work in a factory, 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, for wages that wouldn't feed a well-behaved cat. The noise is deafening. The air is full of soot, metal shavings, and regret. If you lose a finger in the machine, don't worry. There are 20 children lined up behind you ready to take your spot. Don't fancy machinery? Try bricklaying or hauling coal or working in the docks, where your back gives out by 30 and your teeth fall out by 40, if you live that long. Women, you're scrubbing floors, washing other people's laundry until your hands dissolve, sewing buttons until you forget what daylight looks like, all for pennies. And when those options run out, there's always the street. No sick leave, no safety, and no sympathy. Maybe you're a chimney sweep or a mudlark, digging through the Thames at low tide, looking for scraps of rope, nails, or bones to sell. The smell is free, the dysentery also included. Or perhaps you've landed in a workhouse, that magical institution where the destitute are helped by being worked to the bone in exchange for food so bland it feels like a punishment. You're not here to thrive. You're here to not die too loudly. Jobs come and go, illness doesn't. Injury means starvation. There's no workers' comp, no health insurance, and no HR department. Just a foreman yelling at you to lift faster, breathe quieter, and stop bleeding on the equipment. And heaven forbid you complain. There's always someone more desperate behind you, willing to work for even less. Competition is fierce, and compassion is scarce. So yes, you're employed, but don't get too excited. In Victorian London, a job doesn't pull you out of poverty. It just gives you something to do while you're in it. A canonical historical event illustrating the brutal reality of labor was the match girls' strike of 1888. Young women and girls working for Bryant and May, who were paid meager wages and suffered from phosphorus necrosis, a horrific disease that caused their jaws to literally rot away, bravely went on strike. This act of defiance, largely organized by socialist activist Annie Besant, brought public attention to their horrific working conditions and ultimately led to some improvements. It was a rare moment where the voiceless found their voice, even if only for a brief, impactful period. A strange or unusual detail is the existence of pure finders. These were people, often women, who would collect dog excrement from the streets, which was then sold to tanneries for use in processing leather. Yes, you heard that right. It was a low-paying but essential industry for some, showcasing the depths to which people would sink just to survive. Talk about a crappy job. Historians still debate whether the widespread acceptance of such extreme working conditions was due to a deep-seated belief in self-help and the Protestant work ethic, or simply the overwhelming powerlessness of the working class against a system that viewed them as disposable cogs in the industrial machine. Was it resilience or resignation? Or perhaps just a desperate need to avoid the alternative, which was often starvation? In Victorian London, childhood isn't a time of innocence. It's a short window before your back gives out and your lungs fill with soot. If you're small enough to fit inside a chimney, congratulations, you're considered employable. Forget toys and bedtime stories. By the time you're 5, you're already working. 6 if your parents are merciful. School is a luxury. Work is your future and your present. You might be a chimney sweep, crawling through narrow flues, scraping out soot while praying you don't get stuck. If you scream, they'll poke you with a stick. If you stop moving, they'll assume the worst and keep going. Or perhaps you're a match girl, dipping wooden sticks into white phosphorus that poisons your jawbone until it glows in the dark and eventually falls off. The pay? A few pence. The hazard? Bone death. A charming trade-off. Some children are mudlarks, scavenging through the toxic sludge of the Thames at low tide, looking for nails, rope, anything remotely sellable. You emerge soaked, freezing, and likely infected with something Victorian science hasn't even named yet. Others hawk newspapers on the street, shout about roasted chestnuts they can't afford, or run messages for pennies. You run fast, dodge traffic, and hope today isn't the day you're trampled by a horse or beaten for looking the wrong way at the wrong man. Factory work, that's the dream. Indoors, steady hours, just ignore the amputations. Children clean under whirring machines, often while they're still running. You learn fast, or you lose a hand. No safety gear, no days off, no sympathy, just sweat, noise, and an ever-present adult barking orders. And if you're an orphan, the world doesn't owe you anything. Workhouses, the street, or worse. Some are sold into service, others vanish, absorbed into the fog, a footnote in someone else's story. In the eyes of Victorian industry, children are cheap, obedient, and disposable. Childhood isn't stolen. It's simply never offered. And yet, somehow, they survive. They play with scraps, sing songs in alleys, and laugh between shifts, between coughs, because they have to. Because in London, even children are expected to carry the weight of empire on their tiny, soot-covered shoulders. The parish apprentice system is a canonical historical event that tragically illustrates child labor. Poor children, often orphans, were legally apprenticed by local parishes to various trades, essentially binding them to factory owners or masters, often in brutal conditions far from home. This system, meant to alleviate poverty, effectively created a supply of cheap, unprotected child labor, highlighting the systemic exploitation of children during the era. A strange and unusual detail is the widespread belief that climbing boys, chimney sweeps, were actually necessary because only small bodies could navigate the narrow, winding flues of Victorian chimneys. This horrific logic perpetuated the practice. Despite the obvious dangers of suffocation, burns, and chronic lung disease, it's almost as if they said, well, someone's gotta do it, and it might as well be Tiny Tim. Historians still debate whether the public's eventual outcry against child labor was driven by genuine humanitarian concern, or if it was more a consequence of growing industrial mechanization which rendered child labor less economically necessary, thus making its moral repugnance more visible. Was it a triumph of conscience, or just a change in economic convenience? Perhaps a bit of both, with a generous helping of societal guilt once the need wasn't so pressing. If you thought surviving Victorian London was hard as a man, try doing it as a woman. You work all the time, and no, you don't get applause or medals. You get calluses, exhaustion, and a society that expects you to smile while your spine collapses. If you're unmarried, you might be a domestic servant. That means scrubbing floors from dawn till dusk, hauling buckets of coal, blacking the hearth, ironing until your arms ache, and never sitting down unless someone tells you to. You eat last, you sleep in the attic, and if the master gets handsy, well, you should feel grateful apparently. Married? That's not better. It's double duty. You clean your own home, likely a single filthy room, raise children, usually several, cook with nothing, sew everything, and manage the entire household budget with 3 shillings and a prayer. And then maybe you take in laundry from richer households, boiling, scrubbing, wringing, repeating, just to buy bread. Some women become seamstresses, stitching shirts in poorly lit corners for 14 hours a day. It pays pennies, it ruins your eyesight, and if your fingers bleed on the fabric, you lose the job. And then there's the match factories, where white phosphorus eats through your jaw, quite literally. You start with a toothache and end with a rotting face. Management says it's your fault for chewing gum. When none of that pays enough, or when you're widowed, orphaned, or just unlucky, the street becomes the only option. Sex work is legal, unofficially ignored, and socially condemned. You might make enough for food and rent, or you might get arrested, attacked, or worse. Protection? Only if you count wool gloves and luck. Women in Victorian London are expected to be quiet, clean, obedient, and always busy. You're the moral center of the home, even if the home has no floorboards, no heat, and no future. There are no rights, no maternity leave, no safety net. Just other women, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel, trying to survive the same nightmare. But somehow they do, with grim determination, whispered jokes, and backs bent by centuries of unpaid labor. And still, they find time to comfort their children and sweep the doorstep because someone has to. The angel in the house ideal is a canonical historical event, or rather, a prevailing social ideology that placed immense pressure on Victorian women. This ideal, popularized by Coventry Patmore's poem, depicted the perfect woman as docile, submissive, self-sacrificing, and confined to the domestic sphere. This starkly contrasted with the brutal reality of working-class women's lives, highlighting the hypocrisy and impossible standards imposed on them. It was a lovely idea, if you didn't have to, live it. A strange or unusual detail is the prevalence of baby farming, where women would take in infants, often illegitimate, for a fee. While some were legitimate childcare arrangements, many were unregulated and dangerous, with high mortality rates due to neglect or intentional starvation. It's a grim example of how desperate economic circumstances could warp even the most fundamental human bonds. A dark twist on daycare, if you will. Historians still debate whether the limited legal and social reforms for women in Victorian England, such as the Married Women's Property Acts, were primarily driven by nascent feminist movements, or by the state's recognition that widespread female destitution posed a threat to social order. Was it progress, or just damage control? Maybe a little bit of both, like putting a tiny band-aid on a gaping wound. You might have dodged the horses, survived the soot, and even landed a job, but in Victorian London, you can't dodge disease. It's everywhere, lurking in the water, the walls, the air, and quite possibly in the meat pie you ate for lunch. Illness doesn't knock. It sits beside you on the tram, sleeps beside you in your tenement, and sneaks into your lungs while you wait in line for bread. Let's start with the basics. Tuberculosis, or consumption as they called it, because it slowly consumes your lungs, your body, and your will to live. The cough is deep, constant, and comes with blood. Everyone knows someone who has it. Most people just keep working until they drop. Then there's cholera, which arrives through your drinking water like a particularly cruel surprise. One minute you feel fine. The next, you're vomiting, dehydrated, and desperately trying not to soil yourself in public. It spreads fast. Whole streets go silent. The local pump is chained up. Too late by then. The damage is done. Typhoid, scarlet fever, diphtheria, all regular visitors. Each has its own personality, but they all share one thing in common. They hit the poor the hardest. If you can't afford a doctor, and you can't, you're left with herbal remedies, homemade poultices, or the magical healing properties of hope. Of course, there's always laudanum, a beloved mixture of alcohol and opium sold over the counter. You've got a fever? Take laudanum. Cramps? Laudanum. Grieving the death of your 8th child? Double dose. You'll still die, but you'll die very relaxed. And what about the doctors? Well, they mean well sometimes, but medicine is still guessing with Latin. Leeches are still in fashion. Surgery is done without gloves. Antiseptics are a twinkle in Lister's eye. Your odds with a street barber aren't much worse. Disease doesn't discriminate, but your living conditions help it choose you faster. No sanitation, no ventilation, 10 people to a room. It's a perfect breeding ground for microbes, misery, and mold. In Victorian London, if something doesn't kill you fast, it will kill you slowly. And if you're somehow still upright, time to refill your water. The Broad Street cholera outbreak of 1854 is a canonical historical event that fundamentally changed public health. Dr. John Snow, often considered the father of modern epidemiology, famously mapped the deaths in the Soho area and linked them to a contaminated public water pump. His persistent investigation, which involved removing the pump handle, proved that cholera was a waterborne disease, challenging the prevailing miasma theory that diseases were caused by bad air, and paving the way for modern sanitation systems. It was a real aha moment, but unfortunately, many more lives were lost before the lesson was learned. A strange or unusual detail is the widespread use of arsenic in everyday products, from wallpaper to clothing dyes, despite its known toxicity. People were inadvertently poisoning themselves in their own homes, often mistaking the symptoms for common illnesses. Imagine your wallpaper slowly killing you. Oh, darling, isn't this lovely shade of green just to die for? Historians still debate whether the slow acceptance of germ theory, despite pioneering work by scientists like Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister, was due to the medical establishment's inherent conservatism, a lack of effective communication, or simply the overwhelming scale of the problem. Was it arrogance, ignorance, or just too much bad air clouding judgment? One can only wonder how many people died because doctors refused to wash their hands. You're sweating through your soot-stained shirt, your lips are dry, and your throat feels like it's been sandpapered by coal dust. Time for a drink? Sure, but in Victorian London, water isn't your friend. It's a loaded pistol with a porcelain handle. Let's start with the Thames, the lifeblood of the city. It's also the toilet, the industrial dump, the animal graveyard, and just for good measure, the city's main drinking water source. Imagine a stew of rotting vegetables, chemical runoff, dead dogs, human waste, and expired fish flowing right past Westminster. Now pour a cup and say, cheers. Don't worry, the water company says it's filtered. That means it's passed through a mesh of gravel, wishful thinking, and possibly someone's old boot. If you live in a working-class neighborhood, your tap might come from a public pump down the street, which you share with 200 neighbors and 3 nearby factories. And the worst part? You might not even know it's deadly until it's too late. Cholera loves bad water, so does typhoid. They swim freely through the pipes like microscopic sharks. Whole families are taken out within days. A shared bucket, a misused chamber pot, a splash from the wrong pump, and your headline material, if you're lucky. Bathing? Now that's adorable. Most people don't have bathtubs. If you're middle class, you might share one with the family once a week. If you're poor, it's a tin tub in the kitchen once a month, if that. And that same water might double as laundry rinse, dishwater, or a place to soak your aching feet. Hygiene is creative. The government starts installing sewers eventually, thanks to the great stink of 1858, when the smell from the Thames was so horrific that Parliament fled the building. It took stench to make change. Until then, you boil your water when you can, or drink beer, the safe Victorian beverage for children and adults alike. Weak, warm, and slightly fizzy with salvation. So yes, in Victorian London, you can die from a glass of water. The trick isn't just avoiding thirst, it's avoiding where the thirst takes you. The aforementioned Great Stink of 1858 is the quintessential canonical event. This period, when the Thames became an unbearable open sewer, forced Joseph Bazalgette's monumental engineering feat, the construction of London's vast underground sewer system. This project, completed in the late 19th century, was a true triumph of public health, drastically reducing waterborne diseases. It literally saved millions of lives, proving that sometimes you need to literally build your way out of a problem. A strange and unusual detail about Victorian water consumption is that beer was often safer to drink than water, even for children. This was because the brewing process involved boiling, which killed most harmful bacteria, whereas water sources were almost universally contaminated. So, a pint of weak ale was considered a healthier choice than a glass of tap water, leading to a society that was perpetually slightly tipsy. Bottoms up, historians still debate whether the widespread resistance to investing in proper sanitation and clean water infrastructure was due to economic conservatism, the pervasive influence of the miasma theory of disease, which wrongly attributed illness to bad air rather than contaminated water, or simply a lack of political will. Was it ignorance, apathy, or just plain cheapness that kept Londoners drinking sewage? Perhaps a delightful combination of all three. You've tried honest work. It's long, filthy, and barely pays enough to buy yesterday's bread. The water might kill you, the factory definitely will, and the rent collector doesn't take IOUs. So what's left? Crime. And in Victorian London, it's not just an act, it's a career path. Start small. Maybe you're a pickpocket, or a dipper as the slang goes. You blend into crowds near the markets, bump someone gently, and vanish with a pocket watch or coin purse. Charles Dickens made Oliver Twist famous, but the real-life versions didn't get musical numbers. They got sent to Newgate Prison or shipped off to Australia. If you're a woman, you might become a fence, buying and reselling stolen goods in back alleys under layers of shawls and misdirection. Or maybe you run a twilight house where pickpockets drop their loot before the bobbies come sniffing. Feeling bold? Become a coster swindler, selling bruised fruit or watered-down milk from a rickety cart, disappearing before complaints catch up. Or try your hand at forgery, card tricks, or the always popular 3-card Monty, a fast-talking scam with a faster getaway. And if you've really got guts, there's always burglary. Break into a warehouse, a merchant's shop, or, if you're desperate, a church, you might find something valuable. You might also find a constable with a billy club and no bedtime. The police force exists, but they're underpaid, undermanned, and often 2 steps behind. Plus, you can bribe the right officer if you know the system, and let's face it, you probably do. Crime syndicates in London were shockingly organized. Some had territories, code words, and full recruitment pipelines. Then there's the resurrection men, body snatchers who dig up fresh graves to sell corpses to medical schools. It's gruesome, it's illegal, it pays better than sewing buttons. Of course, the consequences are real. Get caught, and you could be flogged, branded, jailed, or worse, transported to a penal colony. But if the alternative is starving on a cold street, well, risk has a certain appeal. Because in Victorian London, morality comes second to hunger. Crime isn't the opposite of work. It is work. And for many, it's the only job that hires. The establishment of the Metropolitan Police Force by Sir Robert Peel in 1829 is a canonical historical event. These peelers, or bobbies, were a novel concept. A professional, centralized police force meant to prevent crime rather than just punish it. While initially met with public suspicion and operating with limited effectiveness in many areas, their presence slowly began to shape the urban landscape, creating both a deterrent for some criminals and a new challenge for others. It was the beginning of an organized effort to bring some semblance of order to the chaos. A strange and unusual detail is the existence of clergymen pickpockets, individuals who would dress as respectable church officials to gain trust and then relieve unsuspecting parishioners of their valuables. It highlights the ingenuity and audacity of some criminals, and the lengths to which they would go to exploit societal norms. Nothing is sacred when hunger calls, apparently. Historians still debate whether the harsh punishments for petty crime, including public floggings and transportation, were effective deterrents, or if they simply pushed more desperate individuals into more organized and violent criminal enterprises, hardening them against the law. Did it create order, or just breed more sophisticated lawbreakers? Perhaps it mostly created a lot of very sore backsides. Let's say you've caught something, a cough, a fever. Maybe your leg's been run over by a delivery cart. Time to see a doctor. Good luck, because in Victorian London, medicine is less healing science and more creative improvisation with sharp metal. Doctors are out there, sure, some even wear coats, but unless you're wealthy, your first stop isn't a physician, it's a chemist, where the cure for every ailment is a small bottle of laudanum, opium in liquid form, ideal for anything from a sore throat to existential dread. It won't cure you, but you'll stop caring. Can't afford a chemist? Maybe there's a barber surgeon down the road. Yes, a man who cuts hair and also amputates legs. If your wound is infected, he'll saw it off. No anesthesia, no antiseptic, just a stick to bite and a bucket to scream into. And don't even think about hospitals. They're overcrowded, poorly ventilated, and smell like old bandages and lost hope. The instruments aren't sterilized. Surgeons wipe their hands on aprons between patients. Germ theory exists, but many still think disease is caused by bad air and moral failure. If you survive the treatment, infection may finish the job. A splinter can become a death sentence. A toothache that's 2 days from sepsis and childbirth. Well, women go in with pain and come out with a baby or a gravestone, sometimes both. Medical textbooks are filled with confidence and wrong guesses. You might be prescribed bleeding, mustard plasters, or a mild electrocution to stimulate the humors. They balance the body by draining it, mostly of blood, money, and hope. There are a few progressive doctors with new ideas: cleanliness, hand washing, maybe even antiseptics. But they're usually mocked by their peers. After all, how dare anyone imply that a gentleman doctor's hands carry germs? So what do most people do when sick? They wait, they sip herbal tea, they light a candle, and lie very still, because every treatment carries a risk, and recovery often feels more accidental than intentional. You don't go to the doctor to get better. You go because you've run out of other options. And sometimes, just sometimes, you come back out alive. The development and eventual, albeit slow, acceptance of Joseph Lister's antiseptic surgery methods in the latter half of the 19th century is a canonical historical event that revolutionized medicine. His use of carbolic acid to sterilize surgical instruments and wounds drastically reduced post-operative infections and mortality rates. While the full impact wasn't felt until later, his work laid the foundation for modern sterile surgical practices, a truly monumental shift from the bloody, unhygienic chaos of earlier procedures. So, fewer screams, more healing, eventually. A strange and unusual detail from this era is the widespread popularity of patent medicines. These were often elaborate concoctions, heavily advertised and sold without regulation, promising to cure everything from consumption to baldness. Many contained high doses of opium, alcohol, or even cocaine, offering temporary relief or addiction rather than actual cures. It was the Wild West of pharmaceuticals, where snake oil was a common ingredient. Historians still debate whether the medical establishment's slow adoption of germ theory and antiseptic practices was due to genuine intellectual resistance, professional arrogance, or simply the sheer difficulty of changing deeply ingrained habits and beliefs in a large, decentralized system. Was it a failure of intellect, or a failure of will, or perhaps just a lot of very stubborn gentlemen who didn't like being told their hands were dirty? The sun sets, the gas lamps flicker to life, and the fog thickens like a shroud. You might think the city calms down at night, but this is Victorian London. When the light fades, the real dangers come out. Forget cozy firesides and quiet evenings. The streets belong to shadows, and they're not empty. The gaslight barely cuts through the mist. Everything is a silhouette, a hunched figure in the alley, a cloaked shape behind a lamppost, footsteps that echo one beat too many. If you're out alone, you're either lost or you've run out of better options. The police patrol in pairs, swinging their truncheons and trying to look menacing. But even the constables know certain alleys are best left alone. Criminals own the night, and most wear shoes softer than a copper's boots. Robbers, cutthroats, and pickpockets thrive after dark, and if your route takes you through Whitechapel or Limehouse, you hold your breath and walk faster. Not because of ghosts, though the fog does play tricks, but because someone might be watching, and in 1888, he might have a knife. If you're a woman, the danger triples. Men leering from corners, offers are whispered. Some follow, others don't bother whispering. The darkness hides everything: faces, screams, and sometimes bodies. Even if you stay indoors, you're not always safe. Tenement buildings creak and groan. Rats scratch behind walls. Arguments erupt 2 floors down and end with breaking glass or breaking bones. Sometimes someone vanishes and no one asks why. And let's not forget the fires. Chimneys, spark, stoves, tip. A knocked over oil lamp ignites a sleeping mat. No smoke alarms. No fire brigade that arrives in minutes. just neighbors shouting and throwing buckets into a blaze they can't control. If you must venture out, you carry a candle or a lantern and hope the flame doesn't blow out in the wind, or, worse, draw attention. Because in Victorian London, night isn't rest, it's risk. The poor don't sleep peacefully. They sleep light, one eye open, one ear tuned to the creak of stairs. And for many, morning is just something to survive to. The Jack the Ripper murders in Whitechapel in 1888 are a canonical historical event that starkly highlight the extreme dangers of Victorian London at night, particularly for women. These unsolved killings, targeting impoverished women, terrified the city and exposed the brutal realities of life in the East End's dark, labyrinthine alleys, where law enforcement struggled to maintain order and the poor lived in constant fear. The fog itself almost felt like an accomplice, didn't it? A strange and unusual detail of Victorian nightlife was the phenomenon of body snatchers, or resurrection men, who would dig up freshly buried corpses to sell to medical schools. This macabre trade thrived in the darkness, fueled by the demand for cadavers for anatomical study and the lack of legal means to obtain them. So, even in death, you weren't truly safe from the horrors of the London night. Sweet dreams, right? Historians still debate whether the moral panic surrounding crime and vice in Victorian London was an accurate reflection of its true prevalence, or if it was exaggerated by sensationalist journalism and a burgeoning middle class anxiety about social decay. Was it really a city of rampant crime, or just a city that talked a lot about crime? Perhaps both, but definitely more dramatic, thanks to the penny dreadfuls. The morning arrives, or at least you assume it does, because in Victorian London, light isn't so much seen as guessed at through the thick, suffocating smog. It rolls in like a living thing, a gray, greasy mist made of coal, smoke, fog, chimney ash, and the weary sighs of 1,000 overworked boilers. It wraps around buildings, slinks into cracks, and settles in your lungs like a squatter who refuses to leave. You cough again, you never really stopped. The smog irritates your throat, clings to your skin, and makes your eyelashes feel sticky. Everyone coughs. It's part of the daily soundtrack, along with the church bells, the clop of hooves, and someone yelling about turnips. You wipe the windows, the cloth comes away black. You wash your hands, the water turns gray. Your clothes, no matter how often they're scrubbed, always smell faintly of smoke and despair. Even your curtains are stained with soot. They hang heavy and stiff, like they've seen too much. You think about opening the window. Then you remember what's outside. More smoke, more filth, and the smell of 12 chimney fires fighting for dominance. The worst of it? This is normal. Londoners live in a permanent twilight. The sun is a rumor. People squint to read. Children grow pale. Plants on windowsills die of asphyxiation. And don't even think about drying laundry outside unless you enjoy wearing soot-stained shirts with a hint of arsenic. During the infamous Great Smogs, the air becomes so dense that you can't see your own feet. People get lost walking home. Omnibuses crash. Boats collide on the Thames. In 1873, one fog lasted for 5 straight days and left over 270 people dead. The city barely noticed. The poor, of course, get it worse. Their fires burn cheap, dirty coal. Their walls are thin, their lungs weaker. Children wheeze through winter like old dogs. If you reach adulthood without bronchitis, consumption, or mysterious blackened phlegm, you're a miracle. And yet, you go on. You light the stove, you step outside, you pretend not to taste the air, because in Victorian London, the smog never ends. It just waits for you. The Fog Act of 1853, a direct response to the increasing frequency and severity of London's smogs, is a canonical historical event, even if it was largely ineffective. It was one of the earliest pieces of legislation aimed at controlling air pollution, specifically targeting industrial furnaces and steam engines to prevent them from emitting excessive smoke. While it barely scratched the surface of the problem, it represented an official acknowledgement of the smog's deadly impact, a recognition that the air itself was a weapon. A strange and unusual detail is how people attempted to dress for the fog, wearing special fog masks or holding handkerchiefs soaked in perfume or vinegar over their mouths, which did little to filter the particulate matter, but perhaps offered some psychological comfort. Imagine a city where everyone is walking around looking like they're about to rob a bank, but it's just their daily commute. Historians still debate whether the public's slow awareness of the health dangers of smog was due to a genuine lack of scientific understanding, the pervasive nature of other diseases overshadowing it, or simply a fatalistic acceptance of their environment. Did they truly not know? Or did they just not care? Or were they just too busy trying to survive the day? Perhaps they just assumed that if you weren't coughing up a lung, you were fine. You'd be forgiven for thinking Victorian London was all soot, sickness, and screaming. And mostly, you'd be right. But even in the dirtiest corners, under the weight of poverty and fog, something human still flickers. Because kindness, oddly enough, survives here too, though you often have to squint to see it. You might spot it in the shared loaf of bread passed quietly between neighbors when one family runs out before payday, or in the woman who gives her last halfpenny to a barefoot child with bloodied feet. There's no reward, just a nod, and maybe a smile, rare and precious. Even in the darkest places, the tenements, the alleys, the workhouses, people look out for each other. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough to prove that the city hasn't broken them completely. A mother shares her hot brick on a freezing night. A chimney sweep helps a new boy not get stuck on his first climb. A dying man gives his boots to someone who still has the strength to work. These aren't grand gestures. They're small, quiet, but they matter more than gold in a place where hope is a rationed luxury. The pubs help too. They're loud, smelly, overcrowded, and absolutely essential. It's where people gather to sing, to joke, to drink away their bruises and their sorrow. You might not afford meat, but you can share a laugh over watery ale. Even the street performers, the penny dreadful sellers, the blind fiddler at the corner, they all form a kind of patchwork comfort, reminders that not everything in the city is out to hurt you. Kindness here isn't naive, it's practical, it's born of shared suffering, because when the system forgets you, when the rich pretend you don't exist, your only safety net is each other. And so, despite everything, the filth, the fever, the fog, people still love, still marry, still raise children, still hope. Because if you can find kindness in the gutter, a warm hand in the cold, a crust of bread, a half-hummed lullaby, then maybe the city hasn't won, not yet. The establishment of early penny savings banks, or friendly societies, is a canonical, historical event that speaks to this communal resilience. These were self-help organizations where working-class individuals pooled small amounts of money to provide mutual aid in times of illness, unemployment, or death. While rudimentary, They represented a collective effort to build a safety net where the state offered none, a testament to the belief that together they might just make it. It was like their own homemade micro-social security system. A strange and unusual detail is the tradition of treating at the pub. Even when someone was destitute, they might spend their last few pennies buying a round of drinks for their friends or acquaintances. This seemingly irrational generosity wasn't just about camaraderie. It was an investment in social capital, a way to ensure that when you were truly desperate, someone might return the favor. A liquid form of social insurance, if you will. Historians still debate whether this persistent spirit of community and mutual aid was a unique characteristic of London's working class, or a universal human response to extreme adversity, highlighting the enduring power of social bonds, even in the harshest environments. Was it English grit, or just human nature, proving that even in the darkest corners, you can find a reason to smile and maybe a cheap pint? So after 14 chapters of choking smog, rats in the walls, toxic water, and toothless chemists prescribing opium for a broken leg, ask yourself honestly, would you survive Victorian London? Probably not. Let's be clear, this wasn't a city built for comfort. It was built on coal, sweat, and the crushed spines of the working poor. Every day was a battle, against hunger, against disease, against landlords, factory foremen, constables, and the constant, creeping sense that the world had forgotten you. Modern luxuries, soap, antibiotics, light switches, didn't exist. There were no social safety nets, no universal health care, no days off. Just another fog-choked morning where your goal was simple: don't die before supper. You'd miss things like toilets, toothpaste, tap water that doesn't try to kill you. You'd wonder why everyone stares at you for brushing your teeth or asking about vegetables. You'd miss showers. Oh, you'd miss showers so much. And yet, people did survive somehow. They endured, not because they were superhuman, but because they had no other choice. They formed unions. They raised families. They organized strikes, wrote novels, played music on street corners, and clung to hope like it was the last piece of bread in the pantry. They laughed, yes, even in the fog. They found love in crowded slums, sang lullabies over screaming children, and danced in pubs after 16-hour shifts. They weren't just victims. They were tough, resilient, and painfully human. You probably wouldn't last a day, and that's not an insult. It's a reminder. The people who did, they carried the weight of an empire on their backs, often barefoot, often hungry, and almost always ignored. They built the world we now complain about in heated rooms with clean drinking water. So maybe it's okay that we wouldn't make it, but let's at least remember them, not as soot-covered statistics, but as people who survived the impossible every single day. The passing of the Public Health Act of 1875 is a canonical historical event that, while late in the Victorian era, consolidated previous reforms and laid the foundation for modern urban sanitation and public health infrastructure. It empowered local authorities to enforce sanitary regulations, leading to cleaner streets, better sewage systems, and safer water supplies. This slow, grudging acknowledgement of collective responsibility marked a turning point, albeit a gradual one, from individual suffering to societal welfare. A strange and unusual detail of their enduring spirit was the popularity of music halls, early forms of variety theaters where working-class people could find cheap entertainment, sing-alongs, and a brief escape from their grim realities. These venues, often smoky and raucous, were vital spaces for communal joy and resilience, proving that even in the face of immense hardship, the human spirit found ways to celebrate and forget. Historians still debate whether the remarkable resilience of the Victorian working class was a result of inherent national character, the unifying force of shared suffering, or simply the biological imperative to survive at any cost. Was it true grit, or just no alternative? Perhaps it was a profound testament to the human capacity for adaptation, endurance, and finding glimmers of light in the deepest darkness. The gas lamps, once struggling to cut through the perpetual smog, now seemed to gently dim, casting long, soft shadows across your mind's eye. The distant echoes of street cries and factory whistles begin to fade, replaced by a profound, comforting quiet. As you let the weight of that grimy, resilient world settle, you can almost feel the softness of your own bed, the clean coolness of your sheets, the silence of your room. It's a profound contrast, isn't it? A stark reminder of just how far we've come and the hidden struggles upon which our modern comforts were built. These men, women, and children, existing on the knife edge of survival, forged a path we now walk with ease. They remind us that even in the darkest, most challenging times, the human spirit finds ways to endure, to connect, and to hope. As the last flicker of that harsh gaslit reality recedes, allow yourself to sink deeper, to truly appreciate the luxury of this quiet moment. Close your eyes. The city rests. You rest.